I work for McAfee. I've been in the security industry a little over 18 years now. And I've seen a lot of changes during that time, and I think one of the next changes we're going to see impact this particular industry is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So today I'm going to talk just a little bit about where we believe machines and humans can come together to create better security for both individuals and organizations. So as we contemplate will machines take the place of humans, we see a lot of headlines nowadays. And if you read those headlines, they forecast a pretty dark picture for humanity as it relates to whether or not we continue to have a role in technology. In fact, lots of folks that are historically felt very, very safe in their white-collar professions are now a little nervous about AI and the implications for them from a career perspective. If we look at the last 12 months and some of the headlines in the last probably 12 to 24 months, I just did a search and pulled these out. The one that kind of surprised me the most was Stephen Hawking saying artificial intelligence may replace human beings. Now, I don't personally believe that. If you were in the last session, Rachel from Autodesk talked about how in their world, they've created Ava, a robot that's actually augmenting their support team, bringing together humans and machine learning and artificial intelligence to create a better experience for their customer. And I think we're going to see that going forward. But with headlines like these, it's not hard to imagine why people may be asking, are robots going to replace humans? But on the flip side, I also think we need to be asking, or are humans and machines together going to be creating greater value across a multitude of industries? I think as we look at artificial intelligence, does it free up humans from mundane, redundant tasks? Does it take on the jobs where humans simply can't scale? Does it allow them to focus on the challenges that require strategic intellect, cognitive reflection, and potentially intuition? And I think the answer to all these questions is yes. Yes, it will replace people in the roles they have today. We saw it in the Industrial Revolution. We saw it in the move from agriculture to Industrial Revolution. It will happen again as we have the next technology revolution. Will it allow organizations to have their human capital focused on the most challenging and critical aspects of their organization and the problems they face? The answer is yes. Yes, people will be displaced. But it will open up new opportunities for those individuals. And as a society and as technology organizations, we have to focus on how do we leverage AI at the same time creating opportunities for the people in our organizations to have a place in an AI-enabled world. Now, in the cybersecurity world, we're already leveraging AI and have been for several years. And in fact, I think there are few who would argue right now that cybersecurity and the focus on that has never been more important. In fact, there are very few people that I encounter that haven't been touched by a cybersecurity incident. And if you weren't touched prior to about a year ago, I think Equifax invited you all to the party. So almost everyone who hadn't been touched, at least in the US, was touched with one single breach that impacted about 144, 145 billion people. Huge amount of people. Now, the idea that a company could succeed in today's business world without a significant investment in digital infrastructure is inconceivable. Almost every company, whether small or large, has a digital footprint, and they rely on the ability to have that digital infrastructure be reliable to execute their business. In our personal lives, the line between what's digital and physical has blurred to the point that sometimes it's indiscernible. I think for some folks, it's a little more indiscernible than for others. We probably all have one of those people in our family who just can't seem to extract themselves from the digital world on a daily basis. But as we look at this, every aspect of our society as a global community has begun to be impacted by digitization. And there are cyber implications, cybersecurity implications, wherever there is digitization. Now, there's kind of a yin for every yang. There's kind of a plus and minus, and in the advantages, with the advantages of digitization come disadvantages. And in our industry, those disadvantages come in the form of an invisible adversary that's hell-bent on essentially capturing our intellectual property, stealing our identity, our national secrets, and impacting our ability to execute the mission of our organizations. Now, our ability to protect against those adversaries is predicated on us being able to solve the challenges associated with this industry. And I fundamentally believe that there's a number of challenges that we face in this industry where AI is going to help us solve those problems, in all probability in concert with humans, but definitely will give us a step forward. So I want to just explore a few of the high-level challenges with you right now in cybersecurity. First is complexity. We're facing an environment that is far more complex today than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. Organizations are constantly dealing with new technology, new applications, users who are extremely savvy from a computing perspective and insist on moving to the cloud with or without IT, downloading applications that weren't necessarily sanctioned, using their personal devices versus the corporate devices. I'm sure all of you have done some of that. I probably shouldn't admit it, but so have I, just to get my job done. And so IT is becoming overwhelmed with complexity. Complexity, we like to say, is the enemy of security, because where you have complexity, you end up with gaps, and those gaps are incredible opportunities for hackers. The second challenge we face is really there's not enough time in the day to get everything done. We can't get it done fast enough. At McAfee, we've gone in the last 10 years from seeing 25 new threats a day to 500,000 new threats a day. In 10 years, 25 to 500,000. Every single one of those has to be looked at, has to be evaluated. We have to determine how to remediate that, how to create some form of response that our customers can leverage. Now, in addition to that, we have something called the McAfee Global Threat Intelligence Cloud. That's a cloud where we maintain a massive database of information around file reputations, URL reputations, et cetera. And all of our products are connected to that cloud so that if they see a suspicious file, they can actually submit it to that cloud and have it determined whether it's bad, good, unknown. We get 48 billion queries per day to that cloud. 48 billion queries per day. That's 555,555 per second. Those are all potentially bad files, bad URLs, bad scripts that are being submitted. Think about the amount of time it would take an organization to respond to even a fraction of that number of suspicious files, executables, et cetera. And then finally, resource constraints. Now, as if complexity and needing to respond as quickly as possible wasn't enough for your IT and security teams, we're also facing a significant talent shortage in this industry. What we're finding as we forecast forward is that by 2020, just 2 years from now, there will be a shortfall of approximately 2 million people for cybersecurity. That means there will be 2 million more jobs in cybersecurity than there are people who have the experience and the qualifications to fill them. We can't rely on human capital going forward to solve the cybersecurity problem. Even if the people were available, they probably wouldn't have the right skill set. So automation and machine learning, artificial intelligence have to be mechanisms through which we gain advantage in this particular industry. So let's dive into a little more detail each of those three. Complexity. If I think about when I joined the security industry in 2000, the world was a lot simpler. And I'm sure some of you experienced this as well, right? We had a couple of different device types. You had a PC, you had a server. There might have been a phone, but believe me, it was a lot bigger in 2000 than it is now. And it did one or two things, maybe email, and it took phone calls. There were no games, there were no apps, right? Secondly, the operating system environment. It was Windows. The only people who got a Mac were the executives and the graphics teams. And the rest of us just whined about the fact that we couldn't have one. Phones, it was BlackBerry. If you were in the corporate world, you used a BlackBerry. If you didn't like it, don't use a phone, right? Very simple times. The network edge was tight. you could count on the network edge of your organization as a critical element of your security posture. It gave you visibility of what was coming in and going out of your organization. And so your security team could feel very confident that they could check any bad behavior at the network edge. Applications. If you wanted an application, it came on your laptop from the IT group. And when you wanted a new application, you went to the IT group to get it. There was no app store in the first, 2000, 2005. Most devices were corporate owned with the exception of phones. A lot of people in the US owned their own phone. In Europe, even up until like 5 years ago, most corporations owned the phone. And then finally, your data centers were all on-premise. They weren't off-premise. There was no cloud, so to speak. Yes, there were some SaaS applications, but they were pretty limited in terms of availability and who used them. Now fast forward to today. As technology users, as people in the tech industry, you can already do the parallels of how radically different it is right now. Device types, everything from your traditional PCs to IoT, to virtual workloads, to tablets, mobile phones. BlackBerry, when was the last time you saw a BlackBerry? Assuming some of you even know what that is. It's all Android, it's all iOS. Tablets. Let's talk about operating systems. With the advent of the cloud, Linux has become much more prevalent. 2000, Linux was a server OS, period. You didn't see it beyond that. Applications, we go to an app store. I can't even remember the last time I talked to IT about getting an app. I think they'd look at me like I was an idiot. Don't you know where the app store is? So the world has changed. Add to that SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, the advent of cloud. 5 years ago, I had customers telling me, you know what? I'm going to put a few things in the cloud, but I don't really see us going there. It's not going to happen. 3 years ago, well, we're going to move a few things to the cloud, but we're not going there whole hog. Now the conversations I have is, how do I secure everything as I move it to the cloud? Radical changes. From a timing perspective, in terms of the challenges we face around time is not on our side as IT security professionals. In 2011, it typically took 33% of breaches were actually resolved within 1 day. In 2018, that's dropped to 10%. Same in terms of the amount of time that it takes to resolve a breach. It went from only 5% of breaches in 2011 took more than 3 weeks. Today, it's over 18%. Why? Because the sophistication of the attacks, the methods that they use to get into an environment has evolved to a point where it makes it very difficult to discover them. Early in the times of attacks, it was all about notoriety. It was about being loud. I wanted everybody in the world to know that my virus took down your environment. Now it's low and slow. The longer I'm in your environment before you find me, the more money I make because I exfiltrated more data. Completely changes the way in which you have to address looking for threats and how long they end up being resident in your environment. And finally, on the talent side, we did a survey with an organization called CSIS. They're a think tank out of Washington, D.C., around the talent shortage. And a lot of it was because there was a contingent of the population that was saying the talent shortage in cybersecurity is all hype. There's not really a talent shortage. And then there were the rest of the folks who were trying to hire people who were saying, seriously, there's a talent shortage. So we surveyed a little under 800 people across 7 countries, and universally, they came back with, yes, there's a talent shortage, and it is not getting better. 62% of those organizations were currently understaffed, and when they had an opening, it was taking them 6 months to hire a cybersecurity person, assuming they could find one. I mentioned earlier, 2 million shortage by 2020. And the other stat that I like, 25% of the organizations we surveyed said that the fact that they had been unable to fill all of their open recs had already resulted in them having a cybersecurity incident in their organization. They were already seeing damage to the organization as a result of not being able to hire. So organizations will and are experiencing a shortfall in cybersecurity talent. And they're going to have to look for ways in which they can approach this problem from a non-human perspective. They're going to need to look for tools that will help them address these challenges without the need to find experienced and skilled bodies to do the job. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the the challenges associated with the volume of information that the IT security organization has to deal with, because frankly, that's where AI is going to deliver a massive amount of value. As we look at this picture, when we start to think about the technologies that are used in organizations to secure the environment, a lot of companies I talk to say they have a minimum of probably 7 vendors, security vendors that they're using. Some are upwards of 50 or 60 security vendors. For every security vendor and product associated with that vendor, there are log files. Those log files are cataloging alerts and events that are seen as potentially suspicious or at least anomalous. All of that information is then getting aggregated up into usually a SIM technology, where the incident response teams in those organizations can begin to comb through that data to see which of those anomalies are likely good, bad, false positives, et cetera. The challenge is when you're talking about billions of events, how many humans do you need to search through billions of events to figure out which one you need to actually do a thorough investigation on? AI can help us with that problem. What we need is to go from billions of events to hundreds or thousands of anomalies, and then from hundreds or thousands of anomalies down to a set of less than 100 events that we actually need to do an active investigation where a human gets involved. So as we contemplate how we may be able to leverage artificial intelligence in this industry, this is an extremely good example of where the power of machines and their ability to very quickly comb through massive amounts of data, do analytics of that data, and come to conclusions is incredibly valuable. That's where they add value. Where their human counterparts add value is they can take the output of that machine analytics, they can apply strategic intellect and context understanding, maybe some common sense to that output, and draw conclusions based on being able to weave together the contextual threads to determine whether or not something should be exonerated or convicted from a malicious intent perspective. Now, when we think about kind of AI, it's basically a black box, right? Now, what it can do for us in cybersecurity is it's very effective at detecting previously unknown attacks. Oftentimes, we're not going to have a signature footprint in the security product for that. It's going to be looking for types of behavior, anomalies in behavior, different activities that wouldn't be normal with the operating system or the user to determine that something is probably malicious, even though it may be unknown. It also is very good at non-deterministic inspection or non-deterministic detection. Where we have challenges with it, though, is that it does have a propensity to produce falses. And anybody who's ever been the victim of a false from your security product on your device knows that that's pretty frustrating for organizations. And believe me, your IT and security teams are even less tolerant of it than you are. The other thing that it's not very good at is telling you how it came to conclusions. Now, AI is getting better at this, I'll give you that. But essentially, in many cases today, it does the analysis, it comes to a conclusion, it makes a recommendation, it shares that information. And when you go, well, help me understand the logic that you used from an algorithm perspective to come to that conclusion, a lot of these systems are not quite there yet. If you're the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of an organization, and your AI systems come back and say, we believe that there's a significant threat in the organization, we'd like you to shut down the DNS servers for your company, which is going to take down all communications for your company, do you want to understand the logic before you hit the big red button? The answer is absolutely, because you don't want to be standing in front of the board explaining why nothing happened for a day and a half while you brought the DNS servers back up, right? So now, given it's an AI conference, I'm going to assume that there are some folks here who believe that artificial intelligence has evolved to the point where maybe human strategic intellect can be marginalized. Maybe we can get better at doing some of those things that humans bring to the table with artificial intelligence. So I decided I would introduce maybe a fun example here, maybe a little scarier example, to test that. So how many of you have seen Labradoodles and fried chicken? Anybody? All right, I just got introduced to this last week and it just cracked me up. So there's this lady, Karen Zach, out of Wieden and Kennedy in Portland, who's got a blog where she does memes, and she loves to do food and critters as memes. Here, Braincraft, which is a program on NPR, talks about research that was done based on this meme where AI can detect labradoodles from fried chicken 90% of the time. So there's a 10% margin of error. Now, is there anybody in here who thinks they're having trouble determining which is chicken and which is dogs? I'm going to go with you guys got 100% on that. But here's my question. You're probably pretty comfortable with a 10% margin of error on labradoodles versus dogs or versus chicken. Are you as comfortable with a 10% margin of error on your surgical robot? Like if you're on the table and your robot's going to give you an appendectomy and it decides in the middle of the appendectomy based on real-time information and doing an additional algorithm spin that the gallbladder's got to go, do you want to understand the logic it used in the process? And maybe you want a human somewhere in the neighborhood to check that out? So as we contemplate AI and the relationship between AI and humanity, there are pieces where machines do an amazing job, and they can do a better job than a human can do. When you start rifling through billions of data points, all day long, they win, hands down. When you start looking at the output of that analysis and trying to apply a layer of contextual oversight to it, humans, at least today, win hands down. Now, I loved the slide because it really outlines kind of the difference between what humans and machines bring to the table. On the human side, it's probably what you would expect, right? It's things like intuition, contextual understanding, ethics, which is pretty important, at least for me, I think it's pretty important, creativity, strategy, and I would add on that left-hand side, hypothesis creation. Whereas on the right-hand side, it's also the things you would expect. The ability to comb through massive amounts of data very efficiently and very effectively. Summarization, pattern matching. Again, things where it takes us as humans a long time to do that. So as we bring these two together, we're going to see improvements across a number of industries and verticals where things that are done pretty well today, solely with humans, will be done much, much better with the combination of the two. Now, I wanted to just touch on a very specific example for cybersecurity. How many of you know what a SOC is? A Security Operations Center. Okay, so for the rest of you who didn't raise your hand, a Security Operations Center you can think of as the cybersecurity nerve center for your company. It is a place where, if you're a larger organization, you typically have incident responders 24/7, watching events and alerts come through the system, and watching to make sure that if there is some kind of malicious behavior or nefarious or anomalous behavior going on the network, they're taking a look at that to make sure that somebody's not taking data, doing a denial of service attack. Ransomware is another popular one lately. So in the SOC, you have a group of people whose sole focus is on looking at a bunch of data, drawing conclusions about that data, and then based on those conclusions, taking some sort of action. Now, there's some specific challenges to the SOC environment that we didn't touch on earlier. First, triage is broken. If we think about that billions of events that come in from a cybersecurity perspective, in most SOCs, 25% of the events that come into that environment are never looked at. 25%. Now, the next scarier one is of the 25%, 25% surface later as either critical or very important events that then have to be looked at and triaged. That means you might have really bad stuff lurking in your environment, exfiltrating data, potentially setting up for a much larger attack that you don't even know about because, frankly, the bodies you had in the SOC didn't have the capacity to get to those particular alerts. The last bullet here is really around what companies tend to do, and I understand why they do it, because you can afford to hire a lot of junior analysts versus a lot of senior analysts. They tend to take junior analysts and have them be the ones that are combing through that data up front to figure out what needs to be sent to the senior guy for investigation. But think about that. If you got the junior guy looking at the events and they're the filter through which an event has to get to the senior guy, it's no wonder we're missing a quarter of the bad stuff. The second part of this is investigations take too long. It is not uncommon for it to take days, months, weeks to actually identify that the organization has been breached, and then another several days, weeks, potentially months to remediate. So 75% of the time of an investigation is spent on collecting data. Sound like something a machine could do? Absolutely. 25% of the time is spent on analyzing data and bringing it to a conclusion. Sound like something a human would be good at? Absolutely. So now as we look at the workflow of an attack investigation, and there's a framework that we use a lot in cybersecurity called MITRE, which kind of gives you a framework by which you can analyze a particular type of attack or attack investigation. There are several steps that we go through in an investigation. The first is collection. Fairly self-evident what that is. This is all about collecting all the information you might need to get through an investigation. The second is really triage. Now that I have some information, I'm going to take a look at that information, high-level look, come to some conclusions, make decisions around where I go from there. Third is prioritization. Here, I'm going to look at all the things that have come forward, and I'm going to decide which of these are most important. Was there a particular set of assets that were involved in this that I might have a higher sensitivity to? Was it maybe the CEO's system or the CFO's system? Was it a critical server where we hold intellectual property, maybe source code that was a target of this attack? I'm going to prioritize based on a set of information. So there we need a combination of kind of machines and humans, because the machine may not always know what that priority should be. Next is scope. I'm going to look at detailed scoping of the attack, what we need to do to address the attack, etc. And then finally is respond. I need to put together a set of responses that will allow me to remediate. Now, if you look at the bottom there, I've kind of documented where I believe automation versus machine learning versus humanity brings value to this process. And as we look at artificial intelligence, it really brings tremendous value in that triage and prioritization in sections where I've got to do a lot of analytics and analysis to try to narrow the field of events and alerts that I end up looking at in the scoping and responding section. Now, if we look at this through a different lens, in terms of what we want to accomplish, in noise, I just want to reduce the noise for my incident response team, right? I want to get it down to a manageable set of events that we're actually trying to analyze and prioritize. Under signal, I'm just looking for those critical elements. Insights, I'm drawing conclusions about what I found. And finally, under decision, I'm going to make a call on how we're going to remediate this situation. As we think about human-machine teaming, human-machine teaming comes into play in those last two, where I'm using the output of what the computer determined from its analytics, its analysis, its inspection, its collection, and I'm then going to turn that into a decision framework for how we move forward and remediate an attack. Now, the benefits of human-machine teaming across these three, and I'm just going to pop through this. Certainly in terms of simplified triage, it's reducing the amount of alerts that a human has to look at. It's really improving artifact extraction, pulling information from that massive data set and reducing the number of events that a human has to touch and look at. Signal from noise, and then automating data gathering, going out and making sure we've got all the information we need to actually make an informed decision. Second, in terms of response conformity, if a human's involved, I don't care if there's a process in place or not, it's going to be done in a slightly different way every single time. We just can't help ourselves, right? And so you get conformity of actions and inspection with machine learning. It will take the same approach every time based on what you've asked it to go do in its programming. And then finally, and I think most importantly, you reduce the mean time to detection and the mean time to remediation when you leverage machines in concert with humans. And that's a critical and very important challenge that we face, is how do we get faster understanding that we've been breached, and how do we get faster time to remediation where we're back to a normal state. And then finally, under staff efficiencies, and I think here's where we may get the greatest benefits. If you can't find talent to fill the jobs you have, it doesn't mean the work goes away. So what you have to figure out is what work can be done by machines and then move your human capital to the work that cannot. So as we contemplate artificial intelligence, a lot of the work that those junior analysts are doing up front in the incident response process of a SOC can be taken on by machine learning and artificial intelligence. We can also leverage that process to help train our tier 1 folks. So if they're working with a data set from artificial intelligence and analytics, as they're seeing what content's being pulled, that narrowing, that prioritization through the analytical process, the junior analyst can also be learning from understanding what the machine is doing and the output it's producing, hopefully accelerating the time you can move that guy from a junior analyst to a senior analyst. Now, I believe the whole is greater than the sum of the parts when it comes to machine learning and humans in cybersecurity. We talked about AI 90% accuracy earlier. We talked about the fact that the difference between labradoodles and chicken is 90% with a 10% gap in accuracy. But machines lack the ability, at least today, to understand context, to apply strategic intellect. So when we bring those together, we get a better outcome. So whether it's labradoodles and fried chicken, or Dalmatians and ice cream, and I think Dalmatians and ice cream is a whole lot harder, by the way, we'll continue to have a margin of error with AI that humans can fill. So the bottom line is, humans and machines together deliver better outcomes. And in my industry, we fundamentally believe that there will continue to be a place for both, and that by leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning, we'll be able to deliver better security outcomes to our customers. And we're committed to doing that for you and the companies that you work for. So thank you. So questions? Cocktails? I think that's what's next, right? Yes, sir.
How do you explain and get customers in a probability mindset for that 10% that the AI misses? Just using your example here. And how do you get them not to worry about that and understand the world of probabilities rather than absolutes?
Yeah, so I think in the cybersecurity space specifically, I rarely have a conversation today where I don't have a customer going like, okay, what are you doing with machine learning? So a lot of the IT and security organizations have already recognized that they're underwater and that even if they acquire 10 more products, it doesn't necessarily make them more efficient. In fact, it often makes them less efficient because now you have a training curve, you probably have another management console, you've got another technology you've got to maintain and update and add patches to every week, every month, whatever that cycle is. And so I think we may be in a bit of a special place around that because the target of our solutions has very definitely recognized that artificial intelligence can do a better job sometimes in given scenarios. So if we looked at unknown attacks, right? Finding an unknown attack is often based on very subtle clues, right? You're looking for anomalies in your environment that unless you're at the right place at the right time, you'll never see. So if you can have AI looking at that massive data set and really looking for that pattern matching and those anomalies, because their aperture is this big, they'll see that anomaly. Where a human's aperture might be this big and they're scanning, they'll miss that anomaly. And so I think in our industry, there's a recognition that because we have an active adversary, if we think about artificial intelligence and machine learning being used in other areas, if you're using it in, let's say, medical applications, it's not like on the other end of the medical application, there's a guy going like, watch this, we're going to screw with them, right? With us, everything we do is under a microscope by our adversary. They get our software, they buy it, they run their attacks against our software before they ever release them. They probably know more about our software sometimes than we do or our customers do. We have a very active adversary. And oh, by the way, and I didn't talk about this because it's an entirely separate presentation probably, is the use of AI by the hacking community. We're going to use it to protect our customers. I guarantee you they're going to use it to thwart our software and attack customers in a more efficient, effective, and accelerated way. Phishing is a great example, right? Today, if you go do a phishing campaign, you're a bad guy, you're doing a phishing campaign, you might be able to do several 100,000 phishing attacks, right? If you want to do targeted ones, it's a lot lower. However, if you've got machine learning, you can now do targeted phishing attacks at scale because the artificial intelligence does all the work for you. So we're having to look at it, again, those security teams understand that artificial intelligence will actually advance their security versus set them back. They're not actually worried about job security right now unless the security doesn't work. Then they worry about job security, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. Any others? Yeah.
So along that line, the aperture is widening. You're a large enterprise. It's a tsunami of data.
It is.
Real-time ingest. That the issue then becomes, yes, you're shortening response time, but response time, even at artificial AI levels, unless you have a supercomputer behind it or check or infrastructure to support it, is still not real time. It's probably not even near real time in some cases. So, yeah, I'm fine with the needle, but maybe 2 days ago.
Right?
So then, am I really gaining a lot at that point, other than, okay, I had a needle. He's already gone, he's done something else.
Yeah. Well, certainly finding it in 2 days is much better than fighting it in 2 months or 2 weeks, right? So, the challenge with security is that it is a constantly moving target. And, about being in the security industry, you never get bored, right? Because everything will be different tomorrow. What you thought you had protected against today, they've recreated a way to attack it tomorrow. And so it's pretty much a moving target. Now, there are a number of approaches you can take. Certainly, you should use every weapon in the arsenal, and artificial intelligence is absolutely one of those weapons. But the approach that we've kind of taken is we've taken a pretty open approach as a vendor. We've opened up a number of our APIs that allow our customers to be able to share information between other vendors' products and our products and vice versa. Because what we found is oftentimes when there's a significant breach and our pro services incident response team goes in, what they find is there was no shortage of security technology. There was no shortage of security talent. The executives understood how important it was, and yet they got owned. How'd that happen? And we understand that how it happened is oftentimes there are silos between the technologies where they might have blocked it at the network edge 3 days ago. But it came through some endpoint that somebody was using to work from home, and because there was no way for the network edge technology to share that block with the endpoint technology, it came through the back door when it got the front door slammed on it. So what we've created is platforms that allow for the sharing of that threat intelligence in near real time, if not real time, so that when he slams the door on him, he can't run around the back door and run in that way. By the time he gets around the house, that door is already locked. So I believe as an industry, we're really moving toward a more open approach to sharing information. Because honestly, if we keep looking at this from an isolated vendor and isolated, customer perspective, we're never going to solve this problem. They will always be ahead of us because they're working together, by the way. We got to be working together as an industry to help secure our customers better. That answer your question? Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy the cocktail hour.